This Freedom Stories discussion is being recorded for use by the International Storytelling Center, ISC. This recording will be owned and managed by ISC and will be used for any educational purpose that ISC deems appropriate. By participating in this public discussion, you acknowledge this recording and its subsequent uses. Closed captioning is provided today by ACS. Freedom Stories, Unearthing the Black Heritage of Appalachia is proudly supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and produced by the International Storytelling Center.
Those principles down on paper and called it the Constitution. And it's been helping us run our country ever since then. The first part of the Constitution is called the Preamble and tells what those founding fathers set out to do. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
What we need to know before she told us what was Good afternoon, and welcome to today's public discussion for Freedom Stories. I'm joining you today on the 1 year anniversary of the police killing of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. It's hard to believe it's been a year, but it has been. I'm Alicestyne Turley, director of the International Storytelling Center Freedom Stories Project. Today's topic is separate but equal, race-based bias in education. It's another timely Freedom Stories discussion highlighting American history and illuminating issues we continue to grapple with in today's society. The Freedom Stories is an international storytelling center initiative designed to bring forward underappreciated, ignored, and neglected aspects of African American Appalachian history and demonstrate the interconnectedness of the past, the present, and how we structure our future. As an NEH funded project, Freedom Stories brings together the folk art of storytelling with humanities scholarship, with the intent of guiding the public, the general public, through a deeper appreciation of the role of African American stories in the creation of American culture. Conceived as a regional program based in Central Appalachia, this project's multimedia toolkit, which is always online, you can access it now, uh, is a presentation of resources we hope everyone will continue to use. It's a resource for the nation and the world. We're eager to highlight the diversity of our Appalachian communities, the complexities of Appalachian histories, and the role the region has played in U.S. history, all of which has often been subject to misunderstanding and stereotypes. The International Storytelling Center is fortunate to be able to conduct this work from a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is the major funder of this series. Today's discussion is recorded along with all prior Freedom Stories, and they are made available to the public through YouTube, International Storytelling Center website, our Facebook page, and I would encourage you, if you're watching and you have questions for me or the panelists, that you can text us through our Facebook page, and we'll try our best to get to as many of your questions as our time permits. Information regarding the future public discussions can always be found on the International Storytelling Center website. That site will have the latest details of our stories. So, and today we'll begin as we always do with the benefit of having the art of a storyteller. And so today we are fortunate to be joined by another nationally recognized storyteller, Bobby Norfolk, who will be joining us from St. Louis, Missouri. Mr. Norfolk began his career as a storyteller, as a stand-up comedian at local St. Louis comedy clubs, and as an actor with the St. Louis Black Repertory Company. Concurrently, he worked 10 years at the Gateway Arch in St. Louis as a National Park Service ranger. In 1979, Mr. Norfolk made his first appearance as a storyteller at the St. Louis Storytelling Festival and discovered that through storytelling, he was able to combine his love and experience in theater and stand-up comedy as background as a story performer. Along the way, he discovered that the brain is hardwired for storytelling. And as a television persona, Mr. Norfolk has won 3 Emmy Awards as the host of the CBS TV show Gator Tales and served as host to the Emmy-nominated series Children's Theater at Bobby's House. With both shows are based out of St. Louis and promoted themes of character education, literacy, and storytelling. So here today to share his story regarding the remarkable life of Tuskegee Institute agricultural scientist and inventor, Dr. George Washington Carver. Please enjoy story performer, Bobby Norfolk.
Thank you, Dr. Turley. And I must say, my first journey out of St. Louis with storytelling was in Jonesborough, Tennessee. It was not ISC during that time, it was NABS, NAPPS, acronym for, wait for it, the National Association for the Preservation and Perpetuation of Storytelling. And, and so it's coming home. It's a homecoming for me to be part of this program. And I must say, in the whole context of storytelling, that Dr. George Washington's Carver's story is a classic case of the hero's journey. I look at every aspect of this man's life, and it is what Joseph Campbell put together in terms of his book, Hero with a Thousand Faces and the Hero's Journey. Now, let me give example, because when I do this program on Dr. Carver, it's 60 minutes long with PowerPoint. And so I was then challenged by Dr. Turley to craft it down to 20 minutes. So I say, I'm with that. So, so we're going to capsulize this man's incredible journey over all the years of his life to become creative chemist. It started off in 1864 in Diamond Grove, Missouri. This man, as according to historians, was orphaned before he was 1 year old. He was kidnapped, left on the ground to die in the forest. And when he was recovered by the people who went to seek his rescue, he had croup and he had all kinds of lung diseases. And so he was stunted in his growth. His older brother, James, is strong and strapling, but George was very, very weak and frail. And so his foster parents, again, hero's journey, often and then you get brought in by foster parents. Moses Carver and Susan Carver brought in James and George to be part of the family. So they left out of the slave cabin and then moved into the regular cabin down in Diamond Grove, Missouri. Now, what George Carver did, because he was so frail and weak, he went out into the forest and he studied nature, the natural order of things. And I want to keep coming back to this premise that this man was not just a scientist, he was a mystic. He was not going around proselytizing about the Christian Bible, even though he had a Bible his entire life, and we'll get to that in a moment. But he didn't go around reciting chapter and verse with his Bible. He sat in that forest and he wondered why birds have certain plumage, why the seasons change. How do these colors change on these flowers, and then the petals drop, and then the trees become all these beautiful colors in the autumn. He wondered, why do these animals have certain colors and configurations? And he hadn't studied Darwin, but he knew it intuitively in his mind as a young boy, sitting in the forest. And so what he did, he learned how the plants could talk to him, not the way I'm talking to you right now, but it was a form of intuition. And he talked about this a lot in his essays, where he could feel the energy coming from these plants and these animals in the forest. And as a young boy, he would go out into the forest and he would take his index and thumb and pluck up an herb or flower with the root system still intact. And then people started bringing him sick plants and flowers, and he would heal them. He would know if they needed too much sun, if they needed a little bit of shade and sand and soil, and they dubbed him the plant doctor. That was way before he got all these honorary doctorate degrees. He was a plant doctor when he was a kid in southern Missouri. But I digress, because on Sunday, he and his brother would go to the school in Diamond Grove and they would learn about the Lord. But then that same school that they could go to on Sunday and learn about the Lord, they could not go to that school Monday through Friday because it was an all-white school. So Moses and Susan Carver had a Webster spelling book. Carver mastered that in about an hour. And so he found out that at 12 years old, he needed to start the journey. Okay, we're going to stay with me now with a hero's journey. His foster parents said, we can't educate you here, boy. You're going to have to go to Neosho, about 20 miles away. And so he got to stepping. And when he got to Neosho, Missouri, he met Mariah Watkins, this Black woman who was a midwife and an herbalist, and she was a healer. And she had the utmost of respect for white folks in Neosho, Missouri, because of her medicinal powers as a healer. And so Mariah Watkins found him sleeping in her barn one day. Boy, what you doing in my barn? What's your name? Carver's George. Say what? Carver's George. What kind of name is that for a boy? Scared him so much he forgot his own name. Carver's George. And so she told her husband, Andrew, look what I found in the barn with the morning eggs. Carver's George. And so she started taking this young man out in the forest and plucking all these herbs and these flowers. And she didn't know how powerful this young boy was. And all of a sudden he would reach down and pluck up an herb or a flower with the root system attached. Miss Watkins, this what you need? She looked, woo, yeah, it is. Boy, you've been anointed. I don't know what it is about you, but you have some special powers that the Lord has given you. And so you take this Bible, and these people can't teach you anymore. You know more than the teacher that's teaching you in the Osho. You can teach him. You take this Bible and you continue on your journey, because Black folks need what you got to offer in terms of your learning. And so he continued, and he left Mariah Watkins, and then he started hanging around in Kansas. And in Kansas, he ran into a situation in Fort Scott. That's why later on, in history, they call it Bleeding Kansas. And you go back in your history, you find out about Bleeding Kansas and John Brown. But I digress again. Let's move forward, because George Carver experienced a lynching, not just a hanging. He experienced it firsthand. He said in Fort Scott, Kansas, he said these white folks grabbed this Black man out of a jail and they beat him, and then they tied him to a tree stump, and they put all kind of wood around him, cardboard boxes and wooden boxes, and then threw coal on him and set the man on fire. George Carver said, I'm getting out of here quick. And even till the time that he died, he said that incident wowed his soul so much that he couldn't get it out of his consciousness. And so he decided to move on. And then he found out that he had some book knowledge. And so with this book knowledge, he ran into these other two white folks, Mr. and Mrs. Milholland. And what they did, they owned a whole area of bookstores. And so George could now sit in this bookstore and he could get all this knowledge that he wanted. But then it happened. They said, George, you need to go and continue your education. So he went to Highland, Kansas, and he applied. And when he applied, they said, we need to bring this young man to our school from this application. It's just superlative. But when he showed up at that place, Presbyterian College in Highland, they said, whoa, we accept Indians and white folks, but we don't accept colored folks. So you got to move on, sir. And that hurt him to his soul. He became a sod buster after that. Started pushing sod buster plows around, and then found he became a fiddler because his foster daddy, Moses, was a fiddler too. Oh, he could pluck that fiddle too. And in that wintertime, during Kansas winters, he would get on that fiddle, and they said, boy, not only can you have some smarts with the plants, you also can pluck that fiddle. But he needed to move on. And then he ran into Mr. and Mrs. Liston. And Mr. and Mrs. Liston told him to go to Simpson College. And in Simpson College, they owned a bookstore too. And he got more and more book knowledge. And Mrs. Liston, who sent him to Simpson College, said that, you know, I'm studying Christian Science, and I want you to study Christian Science with me. And so he started to find out more and more about the mystical side of Christianity. And then later on, he moved on a little bit more and his education continued. And he went from Simpson College, which is a Methodist college in Indianola, Iowa. He then met Edme Budd. And Edme Budd, his art teacher at Iowa State, he was an excellent artist. But she said that as a colored man, you may not make it as an art teacher or as an artist. But let me introduce you to my daddy, J.L. Budd, head of the department at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa. And it all happened right there. He blew up. But it was not so pleasant for him the first time he went there in that first semester, because in that first semester, they made him eat with the custodian and the maids. They made him eat in the basement at Iowa State. And all of a sudden he wrote this letter, heartfelt letter, to called his play mother, Mrs. Liston. The queen was not amused when she got that letter. They making you eat in the basement. She said, I'm coming right now on a train. Look for me at the train station. And she put on her best bonnet and hoop dress, and she walked around campus with George Carver, and ooh, she had an attitude as a white woman. She said, young man, come here. You know who this is? Yeah, that's George Carver. You treat him with respect, okay? This is my son, okay? They started looking at him, then looked at him. Don't worry about the color, he's my son, okay? And they did. It all changed. They talk about a 180. As a matter of fact, it changed so fast, he started eating in the regular dining hall. And when he ate in the regular dining hall, and all the white students was all around him, because he had that magnetism around him now. And then here comes some foolish white kid from Alabama, freshman. And Dr. Carver, at that time, who was still a student, he sat down with his tray in the lunchroom, and young white boy looked at George Carver, and he started banging the silverware on the table and banging his chair. And George Carver said, what's wrong with him? And so Carver wouldn't move. And so the white guy got up, he went over to a table with white kids. The white kids looked at the new student. They started banging their silverware on the table and banging their chairs, and they went and sat with George Carver. How this thing turns around. White boy said, I guess he must be somebody important. The Chicago Exposition was happening around that same time, and George Carver, he drew a painting called Yucca and Cactus. He didn't have enough money to go to Chicago, and so all his white friends got together, and they said, you need to go to Chicago and you need to put that painting on display. He said, I don't have any money. I don't have any suits. His white friends said, we can fix that. They went to the tailor, got him all dressed in his new haberdashery. They bought him a train ticket. They gave him per diem for his food. And they said, what's your excuse now? He said, I don't have one. And then that painting won an award while he was in Chicago. He had a 4.0 GPA when he was at Iowa State, and his postgraduate work, LH Pamel, he was head of the mycology department. So I said, mycology, what is that? Study of fungus. And he said, and I quote, he is the best collector I have ever had in the department or I have ever known. So he was a professor even before he was a professor. And then 1896 came, and he went to Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And he had these visions. He said when he was looking outside of Booker T. Washington's window during that orientation, he had a vision of how all these things would change at Tuskegee Institute. Now, some people call Dr. Carver the Wizard of Tuskegee. Some people call Booker T. Washington the Wizard of Tuskegee. I'll let you decide who was the real wizard, because what Dr. Carver did, he worked that magic when he went into that laboratory. That's why they called him the creative chemist. He would go out at 4 a.m. in the morning before sunrise, and he would talk to God, talk to nature. Matter of fact, he did make reference to so-called Jesus Christ. He said the creator. And there were several things that he quoted that makes me think that he was indeed a studier of mystical knowledge. Because he said when he would go out in these 4 a.m. walks in nature, he would listen to the creator, and the creator would give him all the divine inspiration that he would need when he went back into the laboratory to finish his work. And so what happened was that he started getting some flack from Booker T. Washington, because I mean, I don't know if Booker T was a hater or not, but he may have been a little jealous of Dr. Carver because Carver had so much power and influence. And so it was not until Booker T had passed away in 1915 that Dr. Carver began to then become very, very, very powerful. And the new principal became to the point where he said, whatever you want, you can have it in your laboratory. There was a banker, his name was Jessup. He said, if you want to teach these people about horticulture and farming, I will give you money, and you take the Jessup wagon and you put all the information that you need, and you take the Jessup wagon all around Alabama. And he then started to teach the illiterate farmers how to grow. He had 3 major crops: black-eyed pea, some people call them the cow pea, the sweet potato, and the peanut. And through his divine intervention, he realized that this cotton was pulling the nitrogen out of the soil. And so if you rotate these crops around, and then you start planting the peanuts instead, and then that brings the nitrogen back into the soil. Carver taught of an appreciation of the miracles and the beauties of nature. He said the great creative forces of the universe were divine in origin, and the man who attuned himself to these forces could harness the power and become an agent of the creator of the miraculous. There were several things that he did and several things that he said. And I just want to mention just a few things. Some people said that he had that high-pitched voice, but once he starts talking, people said that his eyes were like glowing coals of fire, and they lose sight of that high-pitched voice, and they could only hear the power of a man who had been anointed. Henry Ford tried to get him to work for Ford Motor Company. Carver declined. Thomas Edison tried to get him to come up to New Jersey. He declined. Mohandas K. Gandhi started getting bulletins from George Washington Carver because he wanted to find out how to raise the level of nutrition with the Indian people, as the Indian people were trying to get the British boot off of their neck. He was almost hired to come to Russia to work with Joseph Stalin. That's a story for another time. But Vice President Calvin Coolidge sought his counsel, as did Franklin D. Roosevelt sought his counsel. And so I think that from those things, he did become the Wizard of Tuskegee. And he said, I love to teach of the appreciation and the beauties of nature. The great creative forces of the universe are divine in origin. And the man who attuned himself to these forces could harness their power and become an agent for the creation of the miraculous. I think a garden should be connected to every school in America to study nature and agriculture. And even if the child does not become an agriculturist or a farmer, these things have a tendency to make the child think. And that's what we're trying to do, to make the child think. And that's what he did to a maximum degree. And the last quote in Carver's philosophy, nature was a great teacher, and an understanding and appreciation of natural phenomena and forces led to a clear perception of all truths. Nothing existed in a vacuum. Everything was an integral part of the great whole. Therefore, when a student really understood one phenomena, he could easily be led to understand all related phenomena. And with those things brought to bear, Dr. Carver became the creative chemist. and people sought his advice all the time. And a lot of people said, well, how many things did he patent? And he said that he didn't want to put his name on a particular thing. He just wanted to raise the level of the poor in Alabama. Some people falsely think that and I'm sorry about this, Mr. Velk, but that whole peanut thing, about the hundreds of things that Dr. Carver invented, I must say that he did not invent the peanut butter. It was Edwin Marcellus from Ontario, Canada, and it was 1884, about 12 years before Dr. Carver even showed up at Tuskegee. But that is not to say that the 300 other things that he invented have the stamp of his name on it. And so it's with those things of his journey, trying to get that education, that I wanted to see all the things that he ran into and the obstacles that he ran into, the hate that he ran into, even from his own people. Then there were people who grasped his knowledge even before they understood it. And he had the nature fairies out there too. Okay, let's go back into that mythology. Those nature fairies that were talking to him and raising his consciousness level. Some people think that he was a Freemason, but I'll let some of the historians talk about that later on. But he did have some mystical knowledge, and he hung out with some Freemasons while he was in Washington, D.C. And rumor has it that he was also part of that cabal that created that symbol on the back of the $1 bill with the all-seeing eye and the unfinished pyramid and E pluribus unum at the base of the pyramid. Things that are hidden in plain sight. George Washington Carver, creative scientist, humanitarian. I'll give it back to you, Ms. Turley.
Thank you so much. Man, you gave us a lot to talk about, Bobby. Today we are fortunate, as always, to have a wonderful panel to continue the talk. And Bobby Norfolk will stay with us for this discussion. But joining him, I have as today's panelist to explore race and education in America, Adam Velk, who currently serves as director of Green McAdoo Cultural Center in Clinton, Tennessee, and Adam Dickson, supervisor of the Langston Centre in Johnson, Tennessee. The Green McAdoo Cultural Center is a nonprofit organization devoted to honoring and telling the history of the Clinton 12. And if you don't know who the Clinton 12 are, you're going to hear about it today. And the first students to desegregate a state-run public school in Tennessee. He currently is creating projects at the McAdoo Center that offer high school students opportunities to get firsthand experiences and mentorship in museum work, something we desperately need. He educates the patrons of the center on food inequality and culinary injustices, and focuses on bringing the community together. Mr. Velk received his bachelor's degree in history from the University of Hartford and his master's degree in public history at the University of Illinois at Springfield. Good Kentuckian there, Abraham Lincoln. He has worked for organizations such as the Adler Planetarium, the Central Illinois African American Museum, and the Lincoln Home National Historic Site, the White House National Christmas Tree, and Padre Island National Seashore. So we are very happy to welcome you to today's discussion. Adam, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us.
Couldn't be happier.
Our next panelist is a civic leader and community activist, Mr. Adam Dickson, who was raised in Washington County, Tennessee. He is a graduate of David Crockett High School and received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Carson Newman University and his Master of Public Administration from East Tennessee State University. Adam's work for the Langston Center is that of promoting multicultural awareness through community arts, education, and leadership. The Langston Center sits on the former historic site of Johnson City Tennessee's Langston High School, which was a segregated Johnson City high school from 1893 to 1965. Langston preserves, the goal of Langston is to preserve the history of Langston High School alumni and create artistic and educational programs that enable students and the community to learn, have fun, and develop life skills. Welcome, Adam, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Wow, we have so much to discuss. So let's start with gauging everyone's experience in public education, which I think is going to be very different. So we're going to start with you, Adam, because you're probably the most different person here today. So tell us where you began, where your public school experience. Could you relate to anything that the PowerPoint spoke to or that Bobby spoke to in his experience, Carver's experience?
So I take it you're talking to
Adam Velk, Mr. Velk. Sorry, I'm gonna have to. That's right. We have two Adams. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So you know, when it came to some of that, you know, I didn't necessarily have the same experiences. You know, to address the elephant in the Zoom. I'm a white guy. I'm a white Jew from, you know, the suburbs of Chicago. So I probably had pretty different experience from that of my fellow panelists. So, you know, when I look at my experience with the educational system, I'd see it as overwhelmingly positive on a personal level, but, you know, that's not the experience that everyone else had. You know, I know from middle school to about midway through high school, I was what any teacher would call a poor student. Didn't do my homework, didn't pay attention in class, was more interested in my social life than my academic work. And, you know, I hit a low point of a 1.7 GPA my freshman year. But that being said, I had excellent educators, wonderful admin staff at the schools that I went to, an incredible support base of friends and family who wanted nothing but to see me succeed and gave me every emotional and, you know, physical tool to give to me so that I could succeed. And, you know, in some cases it meant that I was given, you know, second, third, and probably embarrassingly fourth chances to get back on the right path, to you know, right my wrongs. And I'm very fortunate that I got those chances and those opportunities, because as you mentioned before, I graduated from the University of Hartford in Connecticut for my undergrad. I went on to graduate with my grad degree at the University of Illinois Springfield. And I worked incredibly hard to do those things, not to diminish my work at all. But, you know, when I look back at my educational experience, one of the big things that comes to my mind is privilege, in the privilege that I received to get to where I am. You know, it'd be foolish of me to think that it was just my hard work that got here. You know, had I grown up in a different part of the country, or heck, even a different part of Illinois outside of Wakanda, Illinois, not to be confused with the Black Panther Wakanda, but, you know, or had I had a different colored skin, you know, I would hope that those same opportunities and extensions of forgiveness would have been given to me. But, you know, the probability of that happening is, you know, I'd say I don't know if I would have gotten those same things had I been in a different situation. So my experience is overwhelmingly positive, but, you know, the experiences of everybody across the country don't have the same one as me. And that's really where the issue lies.
How about you, Bobby? You're in St. Louis school system, correct?
Yes. As a matter of fact, during the day when I was growing up, I'm a boomer, but when I was growing up in St. Louis, there was a area called Delmar Boulevard, and it's called the Great Divide. And so north of Delmar Boulevard, 99.9% of all of the citizens there were African American, and south of Delmar, 99.9% were white. And so the Delmar Divide was almost, it made national news. It was so stark. And I went to high school, Charles Sumner High School, first Black high school west of the Mississippi River, founded in 1875. Now, Dr. Carver was going to go to Charles Sumner High School, my alma mater, but he was in Kansas. And it's a long carriage ride from Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas, all the way to St. Louis, Missouri, across the entire state. So he did not make it to Charles Sumner, but I did. And for those that need to know the history of Charles Sumner, he was a white abolitionist from Massachusetts, and he said some disparaging remarks about Andrew Butler, senator from South Carolina. Preston Brooks, representative from South Carolina, did not like what Charles Sumner was saying. Approached Charles Sumner on the U.S. Senate floor with a bamboo cane and almost killed him. Broke the cane, but kept beating him. And then a lot of Southern sympathizers and slave owners start sending Preston Brooks canes saying, with the inscription, "Hit him again." And it wasn't until April 1861 that the same state, South Carolina, seceded from the Union, erupting in the U.S. Civil War. And so they're trying to close Sumner. They tried to close Sumner High School about 10 years ago because it was on the north side of the Great Delmar Divide. But there were several people who would not let that happen. Then they tried it again this year. And I must say that Charles Sumner High School, other than the white abolitionists, it had some luminaries that came out of there. I'm not talking about myself, okay? Not tooting my horn, but I'm talking about some graduates of Charles Sumner High School: Tina Turner, Chuck Berry, Ron Townsend, and Billy Davis Jr. from the Fifth Dimension, Arthur Ashe, okay, and several other folks that I won't mention this time, but just look it up. And
so did you feel as though you had all the resources you needed at Charles Sumner?
I did, and I didn't, because what I found out was that even though we thought we were getting a good education at Sumner High School, when we started going on field trips to these white schools, we found out that we were getting used textbooks, we were getting used desks, everything was used that was coming to Sumner High School. It was being used first by the white high schools and then sent to us. Now make of that what you will. But Margaret Bush Wilson went to the U.S. Supreme Court, Sumnerite, to challenge redlining and through Shelley versus Kramer and restrictive covenants. And I did not know about that until I got into college at St. Louis, University of Missouri, St. Louis. I did not know about redlining and restrictive covenants. 4 years I went to Sumner High School. So I don't know if they were coddling us. And I know, Mr. Velk, you talked about Wakanda and the Black Panthers. Now, I started learning about the real Black Panthers when I was a freshman in college, not at Sumner. We learned about Carter G. Woodson and Booker T. Washington and Dr. King. Did not know about the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense out of Oakland, California until my freshman year at University of Missouri, St. Louis. And so it almost takes me back to Dr. Woodson's miseducation of the Negro.
Very much. And our second Adam, you're now supervising a historic site. How about you growing up in Tennessee, East Tennessee, which got mentioned in our lead song? So what was education like there?
Well, good afternoon to everybody. Growing up in Northeast Tennessee, specifically Washington County, I have to admit I had a fairly positive experience growing up. I think that it's important, I guess, to look at it with some context. In the Washington County school system, I had some outstanding teachers who saw promise in me. And then there was, I guess, coupled with that, there was a lot of support from the community. So growing up, I had two teachers, Mr. and Mrs. Lewis, Boyd and Patsy Lewis. Miss Lewis was my fourth grade teacher. Boyd Lewis was my high school government teacher. And they literally tucked me under their wing. When they would go on trips, from time to time, I'd get to go with them. I remember getting to go to governor's school, which was a life-changing activity for me. And they planned their trip to New Orleans around my trip to Memphis. So we drove right through Memphis, dropped me off, and then they went on to New Orleans. And then when they came back, they picked me up, and we, came back home. But they took me to different colleges. They really wanted me to excel academically. But there was also a community of support. And so there was an African-American community in Jonesborough that really kept emphasizing the worth of an education. So I can remember when I had hair, I would go to Mr. John D. Howard's, he had a room in the back of his house. And Mr. John D. was a unique character, and he would always, he used to dig graves. He was a coal miner, and he did spend some time, as he would say, he spent some time in the penitentiary. And so he was a unique character, but every time he would cut my hair, he would always bend down in a real deep voice. He'd say, "Keep your head in them books, boy. Keep your head in them books." And so Mr. John D. Howard, Mr. and Mrs. William Hart, there was always a group of people in the community that kept pushing me to excel. So growing up, it was positive. I think that for me, the point of awakening, or I guess encountering racism, would be when I guess got to high school and then in college. And thankfully, it was not from teachers. It was just trying to find my place, I guess my racial identity, in a setting, in an academic setting, because when you're the only Black in a group of whites, you're Black. My father used to say, it's like looking at a fly in buttermilk. You're the only one. It's just you. And so you deal with that. But then there's the dynamic of other Black students looking at you and saying, well, you're trying to act white. And so you're trying to find yourself. So that search for racial identity. And I also think about in high school too, when you're coming to be aware of history and you're coming to be aware of your racial self, you're trying to figure out how to address it. And so for me, high school and college, my silent protest was every research paper that came up always focused on the Black experience. And so I always wanted to, showcase the Black experience in my research and term papers. And so that was my way of, again, trying to affirm that myself and my people were somebody. And I guess the last piece, when I think about, again, the racial aspect of my educational experience, and again, undergrad and graduate experience, was trying to form this sense of Blackness. And, and exactly who am I as a Black man? So, when I think about people like Dr. Du Bois and certain others, there's this idea that Blackness, for me, was a political and economic understanding of our experience. So I'm cognizant of the political and economic issues that affect Black people. But if you were to say, for example, let's just hang out and chill for a little bit, let's just relax, let's just take it easy, I might be a little stiff and rigid. And so the idea of, really trying to figure out who am I as a person who likes to read, likes to study, likes to do those kinds of things, as I say to many people, I guess being in a sense a nerd, trying to find your sense of Blackness. And so Blackness for me was a political and economic understanding of the conditions of African Americans, and not so much that cultural sense. So you can just imagine getting to college and everybody's wanting to go to the club and party, and you're kind of, wait a second, but I was politically and economically cognizant of the conditions of Black people. So for me, I think those were some of the issues that I dealt with in my schooling.
And I am from Eastern Kentucky and from Appalachia. So I've got to ask you this, Adam, too. How much of it do you think the outsiderness is the Appalachian background? Because when I was going to school, I don't sound like I sound now. I had that Appalachian twang like you've got, right? I was not going to say it, but since you brought it up, it does get you treated differently. Do you think that's the case?
Listen, Lord, yes, every bit, every bit, every bit. So, trying to being the Black person that again has the deep twang, as you said, and trying to connect with other Black people, trying to trying to show that that we are one and the same. And then my father was a fan of country music, and so I had more connection. Oh yes, yes. Don't mention Fair and Young and
I know.
Hawkshaw Hawkins.
Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. Yeah. Don't do it.
And so all of my connections were back to country music. So as I'm trying to connect with Black people, I remember a Barbara Mandrell song that said, "I was country when country wasn't cool." Well, that didn't connect with Black folks at all. So it was a chore trying to again identify culturally with African Americans. And the way that I could really get my foot in the door was in this context of history. If we could talk about the history of racism, the history of, again, the stratification of Black folks, people then begin to look at me differently, and then they begin to accept me. And so it was a little harder, but we achieved.
Right. The reason I don't sound like Eastern Kentucky person right now is because when I went to an Ohio school, my aunt, who was a teacher, spent the whole summer trying to beat the Appalachian out of me. She was an English teacher, and she said, "Oh no, we cannot send you to school sounding like that. You're gonna get abused." And so she took the whole summer practicing on my thars and my heres and y'alls. She spent the whole summer doing that until right now people think I'm from some Midwestern state. Right. But it was just her, I was in Wisconsin, and she said, "I cannot send you out into the world sounding like that." So I do understand. Let's talk about this idea of integration and how we showed the PowerPoint, try to give people a little oversight, because I think really we don't do a good job of explaining education in this country, take a lot for granted. But in America, this idea of education being a public value, that really was not the founding principle of this nation. Education was reserved for the very rich and the very well placed. And so this move toward public education for everyone is sort of a new phenomena for us. So I'm often struggle with this question. So I'm going to throw it out to you, the three of you. Was integration a good thing for Black people? We'll start with you, Adam. Adam too.
Well, Dr. Turley, I believe that question has to be looked at with what I'm going to call an authentic context. And so underscore the word authentic context. The notion of separate but equal, we all know, was really separate and unequal. And so the Black folks did not have the good end of the deal. And so one has to believe that there were a number of parents that wanted the best for their children and wanted just simple equality for their children. And thus we know the different Supreme Court cases. I wonder sometimes, though, the idea that Black parents did not see the hidden backlash that was going to come as a result of racial integration. Where I work at the Langston Center, the story continues to come up. The Black school closes and the Black kids have to go to the white school. There's never a thought or a consideration about white kids coming to the Black school. So integration is based on this idea that everything that is good, right, and real is on that side of town, not in our neighborhood. So you can't help but wonder, did Black parents see the hidden backlash that was going to come as a result of integration, the effect that it's going to have on the Black middle class, for example, the numbers of teachers that are going to lose their jobs and have to move. How does integration affect Black consciousness? So now, 30, 40 years later, you go into a classroom and you're the only kid in the classroom and you're trying to figure out, who am I? And I'm talking from experience there. Who am I in this classroom? What is my experience? I went from kindergarten to 12th grade, 4 years of college, and then another 2 years of grad school, and never had an African-American teacher. Never had an African-American teacher. What does that do in terms of the Black consciousness? And then the third piece that comes to my mind, Dr. Turley, when you think about this question, what about the notion of Black excellence? And so when integration comes about, Black people now are put into situations where you no longer see people that look like you, that can now push you, nudge you, encourage you, affirm you as to what you can be and how you can achieve. So what does that do in terms of this idea of Black excellence? And I think about it, 20 years ago, if someone would have asked me about going to an HBCU, I probably would have said, I don't know. It's something about the, and again, I love Carson Newman. I'm an Eagle through and through, but now at 42, I am asking myself from time to time, that experience of being in a mostly Black setting where you have other educators and you have staff and you have just a culture of excellence. What does that mean? And so I hear a lot of the older folks, they used to say it like this: we got what we wanted, but we lost what we had. So just some context there as to the reality of integration.
Bobby, in St. Louis, were you at a predominantly Black school throughout?
Yes, Sumner was predominantly Black, and then Forest Park Community College, which is in Forest Park. I think it's Forest Park, so you'll know, is only second to New York's parks. Okay, so
what do you feel about this idea of integration? You think it would have been better for you had you been in an integrated classroom?
The integration came in 1969 when I went to Forest Park Community College to get that GPA up before I went to St. Louis. And then there were white and Black students there. But some incidences occurred that changed my whole concept of integration. One being, there was a group called the Association of Black Collegians. They had patterned themselves after the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland, California. So they were doing a recruitment in the cafeteria, and they were playing Eldridge Cleaver's album, Dig, and it was on the loudspeaker. And so some white students didn't like what they were hearing. They went and complained to the president of the community college, who was from the South, white guy from the Marines. He came down, instead of talking to the ABC students, what he did, he went and grabbed the stylus. And this was a 33 1/3 vinyl album. And he put this big scratch on it, and all hell broke loose in the cafeteria. He should not have done that. And so the school was closed down for 2 weeks in a moratorium. And then there was rap sessions going on. I'm not talking about hippity hop to the barbershop to get me a Jerry curl. The rap sessions were students going into the student lounges and talking about political things. Those were rap sessions. And so that was quelled. And then what happened was that Malcolm X's birthday came. And so some of the ABC students wanted to bring the American flag down to half mast for Malcolm X. Some of the white students from Young Americans for Freedom they didn't like that, and they brought the flag back up full staff, and then a melee broke out again, and the American flag was torn, and so all the Black students got arrested. White students went back to class. So I had a whole perspective of integration from a level that I had not seen at Sumner High School.
All right, Adam won.
Adam, it sounds like
yeah. I hate to do that to you, but again, you're not going to have those same experiences.
Yeah, you know, I, you know, once again, don't have those same experiences. I mean, granted, you know, Wakanda was a pretty mixed town, but it was mostly just white people and you know, Latino and Latinx people. And when I went to college, it was 50% white, 50%, you know, people of color. So I don't have those experiences, but, you know, I do have the Clinton story, the Clinton crisis to really lean on. And so when we look at whether or not integration is successful, you know, the first thing I look at is, well, to whom? What, you know, which demographic of people within that, you know, the grand umbrella of you know, Black people in this area. You know, if you asked Miss Teresa Blair, who was an educator at the Green McAdoo School, which was the only you know, Black school in Clinton, grades 1 through 8, I'd say it was not a benefit to her, because her and an estimated 38,000 Black educators lost their jobs as a result of Brown v. Board. And so from an economic standpoint, they lost you know, their careers, they lost a solid source of income, right? And they lost, you know, something that they were very passionate about. So, you know, but that being said, if you ask the parents of the students, you know, for the Clinton 12, their tax dollars were going towards Clinton High School, and their children weren't getting the benefit of their hard spent tax dollars, and instead had to drive to Knoxville, or they had to take a bus about 30 minutes to what is now Austin East. Who was the one who was paying for the buses? Wasn't the state. It had to come out of the parents' pocket. So it was an additional economic burden. So when integration happened, economically, it was a big benefit to the families here in Clinton, because it meant that their kids could walk to school. It meant that they didn't have to worry about, you know, how are we going to come up with the bus fare? But that being said, you know, take it one step further, the family life. How does it affect the family life? And for the folks in Clinton, you know, I tell people who come to our center, you know, these children were going to war to get an education. We had Klan, you know, the Klan riding through our predominantly Black neighborhoods here in Clinton. They were setting off bombs in these children's yards. There were tanks on our main streets, and the National Guard was here. The amount of violence and vitriol they experienced when they were at school was, you know, unfathomable to me. You know, the pressure of all of that, the traumatic experience had to have been an absolute negative. And it was, because statistically, of the 12 students who were part of the Clinton 12, only 2 of them graduated from Clinton High School. The other 10, their families pulled them out and sent them back to Austin East, or sent them over to California, got them out of Dodge, because they feared for their safety. And I can't blame them. My mom, if I was in the Clinton 12, it would have been the Clinton 11 real quick with my mother. She would have pulled me out faster than you can say hello. So when we look at has it been beneficial, the hope is long-term, has it been beneficial? And as much as I want to say, oh, it's been super beneficial, the statistics, according to the US Department of Education, show that on average, we spend over $300 more per white student in America, as opposed to every non-white student. In mostly white schools, and that's students with 90% population of white or more, we spent on average $700 more than on a student who went to a non-white school, in this case 90% or less. And that's on a national average, but you bring it down to even a smaller, just looking at the state of Tennessee, my state now, the state of Tennessee, in 2017, 37% of students were students of color. And like Adam mentioned, these students are not having that Black presence as in educators. Only 13% of teachers and faculty here in Tennessee are people of color. And break it down to even the smaller point, of all of the districts in Tennessee, 7 of them had more than 20% faculty were people of color or more. And in each one of those instances, the student population made up over 50% students of color. So there's a huge divide here in representation. And the problem isn't that we don't have, highly educated, highly qualified people of color who don't want these jobs, who don't want to teach our youth. That's simply not the case. The problem is that there's some systemic issue here that unfortunately I don't know how to solve, but there's a big systemic issue. So that's the big problem here, is how do we address these issues? Because there are kids, like Adam said, who are struggling with this idea of Blackness and where they kind of fit. And when they're in a sea of white people and all they're seeing is white people, like you mentioned, the fly on the butter, I can't imagine the inner turmoil that causes. And so I think that it has been hopefully more beneficial, but it's a slim margin for how beneficial it has been overall.
Well, I think that these are the issues that, again, rise in the social media today that people aren't addressing. These are the underlying currents that we don't want to deal with, because that means you would have to allocate money to schools in districts that are suffering. You have to, I know much of the elementary education, many white teachers come into Black neighborhoods to get their teaching certificates and their teaching degrees, and they become excellent teachers and then very swiftly leave the Black community and get better pay working in a white school. So once again, African Americans are being utilized as a training ground. We never get the benefit of that quality remaining in our schools, just like our teachers. I know when they integrated our school in Hazard, we lost all of our teachers. And my English teacher, Ovetta Basie, had to actually sue the Perry County school system in order to get, they wanted her to be the librarian. They said, well, we'll make you the librarian so you could still have a job. She absolutely refused, and she said, my degree is in teacher education and English. And so after she won her lawsuit, she became the first Black teacher in an all-white school. And the teaching standards of that school rose because she was excellent. In fact, when they integrated the school, we were we were ahead of the white students academically because of our teachers. But we'd always been told that our school was behind. We did not have the best books, but books don't teach. It's the teachers who teach. So and a lot of our teachers didn't really even use books. We used magazines, we used newspapers, we used other resources to learn. So I guess now you would call that a Montessori school. But okay, I'm coming down. What do you think about that argument? Who was right? Was Du Bois right, or was Washington right? Do African Americans, rather than worrying about striving to be a liberal arts educated citizen, was the better idea to give African Americans a skill that would allow them to be able to live independently? Let's start this time with you, Adam One, since you ended.
Yeah, so I think in a perfect world, both of these men were right, and it's one of those things, you need both. But if you're forcing me to choose one, in this case, I'm going to go with Washington. We've had this discussion in the museum world. How do we get more people of color to be interested in working in museums? Because predominantly museums haven't been a place where the people of color feel that they're welcomed. And one of the hardest things to do is to convince someone who, maybe this is the first time that their family has ever been able to send someone to college. And you're saying, yeah, get a job in the museum world where you're going to wear the same pair of pants every day for the next 30 years because you can't afford anything else. This is not an economically great job. And despite, so many historians saying that blood moves the wheels of history, I'd argue that it's cash. Cash moves the wheel of history. And so I look at Washington and his argument of economics. He said the individual who can do something in the world that the world wants to be done in the end will make his way regardless of race. At the end of the day, not very many, if you have a choice between having a plumber in your town or having a guy who knows about history, you want the plumber. And when you're the only plumber in town, when you're the only carpenter, when you're the only electrician, which are jobs that we desperately need now. We need these jobs. They're well-paying jobs, but people are focused too much on the liberal arts. And look, I'm the perfect example. I'm saying this as a person with a liberal arts degree. The money is in doing those blue collar jobs. You look at the example of Russell Shepard, a former NFL wide receiver. He had a pretty decent career, carved out a nice career for himself. After he was done, he retired. He started waste management, where now he pretty much runs the Gulf Coast in Texas with porta potties and hand sanitizing stations and takes care of all of that. And he's making hand over fist with money because there are people who don't know how to do it, who don't want to do it. And if you can find someone who is willing to roof your house, I can't do that. I'm pretty much at the will of the roofer. If my car breaks down, I'm at the mercy of a mechanic. I need a car to get to work. They're going to charge me whatever they want to charge, and I just kind of have to suck it up. So when I look at that and I look at the ideas that Killer Mike from Run the Jewels in his Netflix television series called Trigger Warning with Killer Mike, his second episode is all about education and how we're forcing too many kids. We say, you can be anything that you want. What do you want to be when you grow up? And they say, I want to cure cancer. I want to be the president. I want to be a singer, a basketball player. I want to be a rocket scientist that also candy taste tests. While those are really great jobs, I assume, while they probably are high paying, there's not a lot of room for those. There's only so many of those jobs. And so he said, we need to start focusing on teaching children useful skills so that they get out of school and they have that economic stability. I look at it as I'm a guy who makes under $40,000 a year, and there's someone who makes $80,000 a year. Economically, they have more power to donate to campaigns, to ignite change in their own community than I have. So yeah, if I have to choose one, which once again, Du Bois makes an excellent argument, and we need civil rights legislation. We need people in the liberal arts so that they have a say, so we're not whitewashing history, which upsets me to no end. Even I deal with it today here at the Green McAdoo Center about the Clinton 12 story. I deal with the whitewashing of history. So we need those voices to come in, but we need to make sure that people have jobs, that when they get out of school, they're able to contribute and make money. And so once again, wheels of history don't turn with blood. They turn with cash. Let's get cash in people's hands.
All right. So we've got some questions coming in, and I want to take at this point to encourage people, if you do have questions, to go ahead. This is your last few minutes to get your questions answered, to go ahead and send it to our Facebook page, and we'll respond. But I want to ask about, one viewer is asking this question. Since most teachers in the US are white and largely white women, how can we empower our educators to be more sensitive to race and ethnicity, especially in our current culture of don't rock the boat in public education? I would say, and also in light of the poor funding in public education. I'm going to ask you, Adam Dickson.
So at the Langston Center, excuse me, we've had a couple of conversations about this dynamic. Mostly white women interacting with diverse groups of students. And because the Langston Center is so new, we opened up in November 2019. COVID occurred on a couple of occasions where we had to shut down the facility because we're part of the city of Johnson City. So the city of Johnson City decided to close all community facilities. So we haven't really had an extended period of time to implement all of our programs. But in one conversation about this topic, we've concluded that we need to engage in multicultural education with white individuals. If we don't see a pendulum shift like we would like, in other words, African American men, African American women, the percentages of Black men and women becoming teachers, then at some point we're going to have to start working with white men and white women teachers and exposing them to multicultural education, so that if you do interact with Bobby, who happens to be Black, and Bobby raises his voice, that you understand that, well, maybe in Bobby's home environment, that's just normal speak. And so maybe what you're calling raising his voice and being ugly is just normal speak. And maybe you need to understand the dynamic of how, again, uncle and mama and daddy, how they talk to Bobby. Because sometimes, again, in Black parenting, somebody's going to talk in such a way, boy, don't you hear what I'm telling you? You know, they're going to talk like that. And so maybe that's the way Bobby's used to being talked to. And so we got to be able to understand these cultural sensitivities. So we've had those conversations at the Langston Center, and it's just been now a matter of just planning it out.
Well, and I can also say, as a college professor, when I've had other teachers come and talk with me about Black students, that and many of the women, even in college level, are white women who are very intimidated by Black male students. Especially, a lot of it comes from many of these colleges, although they're predominantly white, many of the sports teams are predominantly Black. And so these students are in their classroom. And if you're a professor who's never really dealt much with any time, the students they felt were intimidating to them or not being respectful to them, because they were not, when the teacher spoke to them, the student did not look at them directly. Mm-hmm. And then when the student looked at them, it was as if the student was angry. And I was trying to explain to my colleague that in a Black household, you don't eyeball your parents if they're talking to you like that. That's just something you don't do. When you look, if your mother is yelling at you or talking to you, it is respectful to keep your head down and your mouth shut. That is not ignoring you. That is being respectful. But if you see it as being dismissive or something, yeah, so I understand exactly what you're saying. So there are little cultural tales that, if you've never been outside your own community, might be difficult to be translated. And so I have another person who's asking, how do you think the phenomenon of college teams, which is something happening around the country now, kneeling during the national anthem, speaks to the issue of integration today?
Mm, mm. Boy, that's a good question. That's a very good
Whoever
question.
wants to answer, just jump right in. Go ahead, Adam. Adam
Which
two.
which Adam?
Oh well,
Adam two. Adam
well,
Dickson.
just very quickly, I addressed this issue in my civic life. I serve on the board of mayor and alderman for the town of Jonesborough, which is the storytelling capital of the world. And this issue, we are living this issue in real time in our community. And I spoke at our last board of mayor and alderman meeting about this issue. In the context of what we're dealing with here in Johnson City, one of the major responses to the ball team kneeling was that it's disrespectful to the flag, and disrespectful to the national anthem. And I brought out the point that that we need to have, I think, a balanced view of history. And this is just the way that I tend to think about things. So in the terms of balanced view of history, certainly the flag, the anthem, the pledge have merit to those that see those symbols as symbols of freedom and liberty. Those are beautiful symbols, beautiful gestures of freedom and liberty. But to people of color, we have not always had the opportunity to really immerse ourselves into freedom and liberty. If you think about that for a second, we haven't really felt the full extent of freedom. If we talk about slavery, 12 years of Reconstruction, woohoo, but then 1896 to the 1960s, Jim Crow, slavery 2.0. And then on top of that, legislation even after the fact. So we really haven't had the full experience of freedom and liberty. But to people of color, America is about the idea of justice and equality. Thus the need. So in my comments to the board of in the board of mayor and alderman meeting, I was saying that we really have two vivid pictures of America here. And where we really need cooler heads to prevail is to look at this idea of what it means to be an American. And you've got two vivid pictures of America: freedom and liberty, flag, anthem, pledge, and then this idea of justice and equality, and the yearning on the part of students in these ball games, because they're the only reason why they're kneeling is out of trying to bring awareness to this history of racism and systemic racism in our country. Two vivid pictures of America. We need to lower the temperature, we need to talk, and we need to grow.
Adam Velk.
Yeah, I was I agree with a lot of what you said there, but I really don't believe that the issue is with people kneeling. I think that it's a dog whistle. I think it's the dumbest thing that people argue against it, because it's always there's always just the other hurdle. It's, well, you know, when I was living in Chicago and people were protesting down the street, it was, well, I don't mind if they're protesting. I support people's right to protest, but you shouldn't do it so that I have to hit traffic. I don't want to be inconvenienced by it. And then, you know, you move forward, and then it's Colin Kaepernick taking the knee, and people say, well, I'm all for protesting. Protesting is fine when it's a Confederate flag and we're defending a statue, but I just want to watch sports. I don't like, it's disrespectful to the flag. It's disrespectful to our troops in completely ignoring the fact that when he did that, he talked to a football player who had previously served in our armed forces, and they had came up with this way of taking a knee during the national anthem as a way to not be disrespectful to our troops. It never was about being disrespectful to our troops. It's not about disrespecting our flag. At the end of the day, taking a knee is saying, listen, I love my country. I love it. I love where I live. I love being in America. But America isn't perfect. We can still be better. We're not done. We're still a young country. There's still ways for us to continue to improve always. It's no different than asking your spouse or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, you know, hey, can you pick up your dirty socks? You know, like it's uncomfortable to say that to someone you've been living with for 10 years. Hey, can you pick up your dirty socks? But you have to have these conversations or else nothing changes. This is the spark. This is the ability to have the conversation. Taking the knee is having the conversation, but the other side just doesn't want to have it. They don't want to have this conversation. And so the one thing that I absolutely love is here in Tennessee, people love the University of Tennessee basketball team, the football team. I've never seen so much pride for a college team. And players are not signing to play sports here at the University of Tennessee, and they're going to suffer because of it. People are leaving the program because there's politicians who are trying to make laws saying, well, we need to make sure everybody stands for the flag and do that. And so they're saying, fine, you want to do that? Go ahead. I'm going to go to a school that allows me to have my voice. And so it's flipping on them. And now they're going to have to deal with
the end of our time. See how quickly that hour and a half goes. And so I thank our viewers so much for tuning in. We'll get to your questions. Please, if you still have questions for our panelists, continue to text those in. We'll do our best, if we don't do it online, to answer you in other ways. Thank you so much for viewing Freedom Stories today. And please plan to come back again on April 10th at the same time for our story on out-migration from Appalachia, spreading Appalachia abroad. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Bobby Norfolk, for that wonderful story. And we will see you in April.